Hey there, friends. Today we're talking about 15 new games that already dropped in 2025 and are definitely worth your attention. And since, well, none of us really love those long, drawn-out intros, I'll just remind you to subscribe to the channel if you're here for the first time, and let's get started. Battlefield 6. Hot new release that literally came out a week ago and gathered crowds of hyped fans to Wii. Because the devs finally brought back what made the old iconic entries so beloved. Namely, total destruction of everything on the map, fast-paced action where everything around you is exploding, and satisfying gunplay with well-balanced maps. Surprisingly enough, the game doesn't really bring anything new, it just brings back what was removed from previous entries. Yeah, there's even a story campaign, but it mostly serves as, a tutorial before the real multiplayer battles. And while the devs try to refresh the classic capture and hold formats, overall, it still feels familiar. With massive battles where up to 128 players can fight on a single map, both as infantry and controlling various vehicles from tanks to planes and helicopters. The only thing is, maps got smaller, which means action density per square meter increased. But at the same time, these maps feel more intimate. Though, that's kind of nitpicking. Everything else? Battlefield 6 is finally a return to the series' roots, where you can hop in for just an hour and suddenly realize you spent the whole night playing without even noticing. Fast, dynamic, action-packed, and with top-tier graphics. Silent Hill F. A step away from the classic series, which got it some hate even before release. Though, if you think about it, Japan was the perfect setting for a Silent Hill game, and finally the devs made it happen. And despite mediocre optimization, it turned out pretty decent overall. In short, the new game's story follows a Japanese schoolgirl in a fictional Japanese town from the 60s, where throughout the playthrough we experience true hell in Silent Hill fashion. There are plenty of brutal and bloody scenes, and the game tackles themes of growing up, loneliness, and inner conflict through the lens of horror and mystery. And since we're playing as a schoolgirl, obviously they'll touch on bullying, sexism, and other traumatic things for a child from a troubled family. But despite our heroine's age, she knows how to fight. Combat in the game is pretty tough, with emphasis on waiting for the right moment to strike and limited stamina with scarce resources. Weapons break, and the character's stamina recovers slowly. Plus, as any proper atmospheric horror should have, the game features well-implemented puzzles, which is awesome. The game takes about 10 to 12 hours to complete, has multiple endings, and overall turned out solid. Shame about the optimization though, but that's pretty much the fate of most modern Unreal Engine 5 games. For those who miss real old-school horror games, I recommend it. Metal Eden. For those of you who've been craving high-octane shooters with super dynamic gameplay, heads up, this first-person shooter dropped in early September. Story-wise, the action takes place in the distant future where humans learn to upload consciousness into robot bodies. So our main heroine is basically an android. She becomes, you could say, the last hope of a dying civilization as she heads into a dark megacity to save digital copies of people trapped in capsules but then taken over by mysterious engineers. And that's pretty much it for the story because the key feature here is the gameplay. And it's focused on extremely fast-paced action, where our lady has to maneuver between enemies using parkour, wall running, gravity tricks and dashes, plus transforms into an armored battering ram to smash through obstacles, which strongly resembles either Ghost Runner or the latest Doom games, if we're being honest. Yeah, and graphically, the game constantly throws tons of different effects at you throughout the playthrough, so if you love this kind of dynamic, carnage, definitely check it out. Also recently dropped a brand new game in the Dying Light series with the subtitle The Beast, which was initially planned as DLC for the second game, but eventually grew into a full standalone entry. It's, kind of a story bridge between the first and second game, where we control the original's hero who was experimented on for 13 years and pumped full of zombie DNA, which basically explains all the new abilities throughout the playthrough. The hero's story goal is pretty straightforward, though quite cliché. Find whoever experimented on him and basically get revenge. The gameplay itself now offers, you could say, two playstyles. Either play through as a human or transform into a beast to extremely stylishly and brutally tear zombies to pieces. In this regard, the game is genuinely good, because the dismemberment is implemented really well. Something the devs were clearly proud of, dedicating, even a separate trailer to it. And the good old parkour is satisfying too. Skill progression, open world exploration, completing various side quests, both solo and co-op, everything's in place. Plus, you can explore the world not just on foot, but using vehicles, whether an SUV or motorcycle, which is crucial given the lack of fast travel. The game takes a while to complete. The campaign alone can take 20 to 25 hours, and if you do all the side quests, you can easily kill 50 hours. Next up, a brand new rhythm game with roguelike and strategy elements called Ratatan. Basically, the spiritual successor to the legendary Patapon from PSP. A game where you essentially play as a musical adventurer with, amnesia, who sets out on a journey to recover their memories from a local goddess. Basically, the whole story setup here is purely for show. What really sells this game is the gameplay itself. It's a rhythm game where, as you'd guess, there are buttons, about 7 of them, and you need to press each one in rhythm with the music while commanding your little army. You can play the game solo or in co-op with friends, up to 4 players. Considering it's a roguelike, you'll encounter all sorts of random levels, enemies, bosses, and loot, useful for upgrades. Battles are fast, but again, it's important to stay on rhythm, otherwise you'll lose. And visually, the game is super vibrant, literally a living cartoon on your screen. If you love unique roguelikes, definitely check it out. And if you still have an old PSP lying around, you can revisit the original. And speaking of Sony consoles, if your PlayStation 5 is collecting dust, time to blow it off because the long-awaited exclusive finally dropped. Ghost of Yotei. Yeah, a game from the same devs who gave us the magnificent Ghost of Tsushima. Though this game's action takes place 300 years later, and this time you'll play as a woman. Her name is Atsu, a mercenary who miraculously survived a brutal massacre of her family, carried out by a group of warriors known as the Six of Yotei. And following the classic samurai game formula, and honestly Japanese feudal games in general, our task is to find nearly everyone involved and get revenge in the most stylish way possible. Well, eliminate them. Like the previous game, you'll explore a large and beautiful open world inspired by real northern Japan locations, including Mount Yotei. And the order in which you deal with the 6 main, bosses, that's up to you as you progress, so the story won't follow a strictly linear path. Also, our heroine will be accompanied by a pretty stylish companion, Grey Wolf, who logically will help in combat against enemies. And yeah, about that, Atsu, unlike Jin, isn't bound by the Samurai Code, which opens access to more diverse combat moves, stealth, and an extensive arsenal where each weapon has a unique moveset and is effective against specific enemies. Bottom line, by use if you love typical Sony games, it's definitely worth trying. For those who need more massive 4X strategies, I'm happy to inform you that not long ago the sequel to Endless Legends dropped. The second part, set on an oceanic planet on the brink of ecological catastrophe, and the reason is pretty logical. The natural balance is disrupted, and weather cataclysms plus seasonal tides change the landscape and reveal new territories for exploration and conquest. Overall, this dynamic location shift is the game's main highlight, as receding waters gradually reveal new lands full of resources and anomalies, bringing unpredictability to strategic planning. Typically, at the start of each match, 5 factions are available, each with different philosophies, abilities, and development styles. As usual in such games, there are multiple paths to victory, from conquering all available lands to scientific and diplomatic supremacy through alliances with minor factions. And yeah, the game puts significant emphasis on battles. Each side of the conflict has special units, stats, weapons, and attributes that can change the battle's outcome if used correctly. Plus, there's terrain influence. You need to consider landscapes and other location features before each battle. Long story short, if you love strategies with deep and thoughtful gameplay, worth trying. Based on Steam reviews, the game has tons of positive feedback, which is well-deserved. Another really nice indie release that's also pretty under the radar, but caught my attention is Arctic Awakening, which reminded me a bit of my favorite Firewatch, so I just couldn't pass it up. Here we play as a pilot named Kai, a man of, tough luck with a huge baggage from the past, who has a companion in the form of a small robot that was court-ordered to him as a therapist. At first, everything's going fine. You're flying over the Arctic, but then due to a storm you crash and lose one of your crew members, finding yourself in absolute hell. So the task is to find them while exploring tons of different locations and chatting with your robot helper. Plus, as you progress, you start to realize the place you ended up in isn't as simple as it first seems. Though gameplay-wise, the game won't surprise you much. It's very much a typical modern walking simulator, where you occasionally solve simple puzzles. After all, the main focus is on atmosphere, and that turned out solid. Shame the game itself is short. Takes maybe 5 to 6 hours max. But for some people, that's actually a plus, since you don't have to waste tons of time on another drawn-out story. Alien Rogue Incursion. And briefly, I can tell you about another shooter that came out at the end of September. And this time, it's a game set in the Alien universe. Initially, it was supposedly a full VR project for PlayStation 5, if I'm not mistaken, but this year they ported it to PC so you can play both in VR headset and as a regular first-person shooter. Story-wise, the setup is dead simple. We play as a female Marine who arrives at some mine crawling with xenomorphs, walls covered in blood, workers in cocoons, and aliens constantly trying to feast on you. Basically, all the classics. Plus, as you progress, you learn someone screwed up again by breeding xenomorphs in labs, and there's a mention of the main heroine from Alien Isolation, Amanda. Gameplay-wise, everything's straightforward. Typical shooter in the spirit of Alien's Colonial Marines from 2013. You run through dark bases, collect ammo and medkits from lockers, hack terminals, solve puzzles, and obviously fight aliens. I'll say right away, don't expect a serious survival horror like Alien Isolation and similar games. This is just a shooter set in the Alien universe. Nothing more, nothing less. Let's step away from big AAA projects for a bit towards something less known. For example, in August, a very atmospheric indie game called Herdling came out. A game from the creators of such indie masterpieces as FR Lone Sails and FR Changing Tides. I'm sure many of you haven't even heard of these games, and honestly, that's a real shame. Story-wise, we control a lonely kid in a post-apocalyptic world who has his own herd of calicorns. Basically, very unusual cows. The goal is pretty simple. Travel across the world through different regions searching for a better place, or something like that. Following the classic formula for such projects, the whole story and plot is told without words. Usually through the environment, purely through visuals or actions. And the gameplay is, like a simple shepherd simulator. You'll need to lead your own herd, whistle to make them follow you, push rocks, and solve puzzles. Like how you need to get everyone across a river, or hide from dangers like avalanches or wild animals. The key feature of such games is, surprisingly, just exploration. You really shouldn't rush headlong just to finish the game quickly because you'll miss all the fun that way. And visually, despite the modest budget, the game looks way more pleasant than most modern Unreal Engine games, largely thanks to the artist's work, which I personally value way more than technology without any style. Now back to AAA games, but not very successful ones. For example, in September, the 4th Borderlands game came out with just terrible optimization, though now the situation seems to be slowly improving. Conceptually, the game hasn't changed much, especially if you're familiar with previous series entries. It's still a looter shooter where we have a new crew of vault hunters to choose from, so you can play solo or in co-op with friends. Typically, we choose a character with unique skills and head off on another adventure. This time we have a huge open world divided into 4 main regions, each filled with tons of side activities. And you can explore or travel this world not just on foot, but using combat vehicles. Like weapons, you can customize them too. Despite having 4 default classes, each has 3 main combat abilities with additional modifiers and an extensive progression system that lets you build different builds even within a single class. Plus, new heroes are supposedly planned to be added with DLC releases. In my opinion, it's your typical looter shooter in the spirit of previous games. Nothing special here except for the terrible technical state. Hopefully they'll at least fix that with patches over time. also came out in September. Another pretty dynamic game, but this time with more emphasis on space themes and co-op focus, called Jump Space. The name speaks for itself. It's a co-op shooter that conceptually takes the idea from Sea of Thieves, except now the thieves aren't at sea but in space, with PvE elements like Left 4 Dead. Here we control a space crew where everyone has their own duties. Someone takes the pilot's seat, someone monitors systems and handles repairs, and someone focuses on fighting enemies. Though there's no strict assignment of duties, I'm just saying, because you can freely move around the ship and use available equipment as events unfold. Separately, I'd like to praise the completely seamless transition between controlling the ship in third person, planetary landings, and spacewalks for exploration or boarding. Also, planetary missions are a whole separate pleasure, kind of reminiscent of dungeon clearing from various RPGs. Missions are handcrafted, but have random elements added for replayability. Overall, a great game for a group of friends. Next up, Baby Steps. I remember it was announced not too long ago. Turns out 2 years ago at one of the showcases. Honestly, I can't remember which one exactly, but the point is that even back then the game attracted many people with its absurd concept. You know how some games are called walking simulators? Well, here that phrase fits almost literally because it's a simple but engaging game that's more like a joke. Its gameplay boils down to a very simple action. The main character just walks forward across rocky terrain. The catch is you need to manually control literally every movement of the character, which leads to unexpected and hilarious results. The game even has some semblance of a story, and it matches the controls perfectly. It's a simple story full of absurd humor about a poor guy who lived a very boring life, but one day decided to take a walk across rough terrain. During this walk, you can also do simple activities like collecting various collectibles. I think it's obvious to everyone that you shouldn't expect any masterpiece. It's just a fun trash game that's best played on a big TV with friends for a good time. Wires and Whiskers. I'm sure many of you know about like A Way Out, It Takes Two, or the more recent Split Fiction, games with good story campaigns focused on co-op playthroughs. Well, recently something similar came out, but extremely under the radar. It's a free game that's pretty short and takes just one good evening to complete with your friend. Here's the deal. The world has ended, mutants roam everywhere, and you play as a hamster with implants magnetically linked to your exoskeleton robot. By the way, that exoskeleton is the second player. Your goal is simple. Get out, breaking through irradiated corridors and traps. There are no dialogues, drama, or anything like that in the game. You just plug in a gamepad and play together on one screen, solving simple puzzles, fighting mutants, and jumping across platforms. The game is super straightforward both visually and gameplay-wise. And considering it's free on Steam, it'd be a shame to nitpick too much. Like I said above, it's just a nice project where you can spend time in co-op with a friend. Voyagers of Nera. And not straying far from co-op games, this is a simple but pleasant co-op survival game. And it came out not that long ago in September. There's really no point in rambling here. It's typical co-op survival where you start on a small island, craft a boat from scrap materials, and then set off to explore the world, surfing the waves, finding different biomes, building villages with custom houses, farmers, and altars for spirits. Oh yeah, these spirits are basically your key to upgrading different skills. They unlock new recipes, cook food, or heal. You'll also upgrade your weapons, armor, and accessories. Plus, I'd like to praise the visuals. Yeah, it's not super high-tech, but very bright and vibrant. The views you encounter in the game are genuinely nice, which is definitely a plus. But yeah, typical early access survival game. Steam reviews are positive, so if you're looking for something to kill time with friends, definitely not the worst option. I don't know if any of you remember or not, but back in the day there was a pretty solid SHINOBI game series. Kind of like an old-school side-scroller where playing as a ninja, you had to eliminate everyone. Well, they decided to reboot this series, and in August a game with the subtitle Art of Vengeance came out. By the way, the developers are the same guys who gave us Streets of Rage 4, so this game also turned out great. Experience, as they say, is something you can't lose. The story itself tells you a classic revenge tale for such games. We play as Shinobi, whose clan was destroyed by the powerful immortal Lord Ryus. The goal is to find him and get revenge, embarking on this journey. And the latter is your typical side-scroller with platformer elements, where tons of pretty nice-looking locations await us visually, with various puzzles, loads of enemies, a rich arsenal of weapons and combat moves where emphasis is on combining both weapons and magic. Plus, obviously the game has bosses. There are plenty of them, so you'll definitely need to work hard, and more than once for sure.